Political institutions. Mexico is a country in economic and political transition. As a result, it is difficult to categorize its regime type. For many years, its government was highly authoritarian, with the president serving virtually as a dictator for a 6-year term. Mexico's economy has also been underdeveloped and quite dependent on the economies of stronger nations, particularly that of the United States. However, in recent years, Mexico has shown strong signs of economic development, accompanied by public policies supportive of a free market economy. Also, the country's political parties are becoming more competitive, and the dictatorial control of PRI has been soundly broken by elections since 1997. Although the political structures themselves remain the same as they were before, significant political and economic reforms have greatly altered the ways that government officials operate. Regime type. Traditionally, Mexico has had a state corporatist structure, central, authoritarian rule that allows input from interest groups outside of government. Through the camarilla system, leaders of important groups, including business elites, workers, and peasants, actually served in high government offices. Today, political and economic liberalization appears to be leading toward a more open structure, but corporatism is still characteristic of policymaking. Is the modern Mexican government authoritarian or democratic? Is the economy centrally controlled, or does it operate under free market principles? The answers are far from clear, but the direction of the transition is toward both economic and political liberalization. Developed, developing, or LDC. Categorizing the economic development of countries can be tricky business, with at least 4 different ways to measure it. GNP per capita. This figure is an estimate of a country's total economic output divided by its total population, converted to a single currency, usually the US dollar. This measure is often criticized because it does not take into account what goods and services people can actually buy with their local currencies. PPP, purchasing power parity. This measure takes into account the actual cost of living in a particular country by figuring what it costs to buy the same bundle of goods in different countries. Mexico's figure is $17,900 per year. HDI, Human Development Index. The United Nations has put together this measure based on a formula that takes into account the 3 factors of longevity: life expectancy at birth, knowledge, literacy, and the average years of schooling, and income, according to PPP. Mexico's literacy rate is 96.2% for men and 94.2% for women, and life expectancy is 72.88 for men and 78.55 for women. Economic dependency. A less developed country is often dependent on developed countries for economic support and trade. Generally speaking, economic trade that is balanced between nations is considered to be good. A country is said to be developing when it begins relying less on a stronger country to keep it afloat financially. Despite recent attempts to change the balance, Mexico is still quite dependent on the U.S. for trade, jobs, and business. Economic inequality. The economies of developing countries usually benefit the rich first, so characteristically, the gap between the rich and poor widens. This trend is evident in Mexico with its high Gini coefficient of 0.47. No matter which way you figure it, Mexico comes out somewhere in the middle, with some countries more developed and some less. Since these indices in general are moving together upward over time for Mexico, it is said to be developing. A transitional democracy. Politically, Mexico is said to be in transition between an authoritarian-style government and a democratic one. From this view, modernization theory, democracy is assumed to be a modern government type, and authoritarianism more old-fashioned. Governments, then, may be categorized according to the degree of democracy they have. How is democracy measured? Usually by these characteristics. Political accountability. In a democracy, political leaders are held accountable to the people of a country. The key criterion is usually the existence of regular, free, and fair elections. Political competition. Political parties must be free to organize, present candidates, and express their ideas. The losing party must allow the winning party to take office peacefully. Political freedom. The heir to democracy's fire is political freedom, assembly, organization, and political expression, including the right to criticize the government. Political equality. Signs of democracy include equal access to political participation, equal rights as citizens, and equal weighting of citizens' votes. Mexico, especially in recent years, has developed some democratic characteristics, but still has many vestiges of its authoritarian past, as we've seen. The Economist, in its 2014 Democracy Index, categorizes Mexico as a flawed democracy, ranking it 57th of 167 countries in terms of its functioning as a democracy, its electoral process, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. Another often used standard for considering a country a democracy is the longevity of democratic practices. If a nation shows consistent democratic practices for a period of 40 years or so, a somewhat arbitrary number, then it may be declared a stable democracy. Mexico does not fit this description. Linkage institutions. Before the trend toward democratization took hold during the late 20th century, Mexico's political parties, interest groups, and mass media all worked to link Mexican citizens to their government in significant ways. This linkage took place under the umbrella of PRI elite rulers, so that a true independent civil society did not exist. However, as democratization began and civil society developed, the structures were already in place, so that activating democracy was easier than it would have been otherwise. Political parties. For most of the 20th century, Mexico was virtually a one-party state. In 2000, all presidents belonged to PRI, as did most governors, representatives, senators, and other government officials. Over the past 20 years or so, other parties have gained power, so that today competitive elections are a reality, at least in many parts of Mexico. The three largest parties in Mexico today are PRI, PAN, and PRD. PRI. The Partido Revolucionario Institucional was in power continuously from 1920 until 2000, when an opposition candidate finally won the presidency. PRI was founded as a coalition of elites who agreed to work out their conflicts through compromise rather than violence. By forming a political party that encompassed all political elites, they could agree to trade favors and pass power around from one cacique to another. The party traditionally was characterized by a corporatist structure. Interest groups are woven into the structure of the party. The party has the ultimate authority, but other voices are heard by bringing interest groups under the broad umbrella of the party. The structure is not democratic, but allowed input into the government from party-selected groups whose leaders often held cabinet positions when Mexico was a one-party state. Particularly since the Cardenas Sexenio, 1934 to 1940, peasant and labor organizations have been represented in the party and hold positions of responsibility. But these groups are carefully selected and controlled by the party. Patron-client system. The party traditionally gets its support from rural areas where the patron-client system is still in control. As long as Mexico remained rural-based, PRI had a solid, thorough organization that managed to garner overwhelming support. Until the election of 1988, there was no question that the PRI candidate would be elected president, with 85 to 90% victories being normal. PRI lost the presidency in 2000 to the National Action Party's Vicente Fox, and it trailed the other two major parties in the election of 2006. However, in the midterm elections of 2009, it picked up major support in the legislature, and, by forming a coalition with a minor party, held a majority of seats in the lower house of the legislature. In 2012, PRI candidate Enrique Peña Nieto won the presidency, but PRI lost a significant number of seats in the Chamber of Deputies. PAN. The National Action Party, or PAN, was founded in 1939, making it one of the oldest opposition parties. Although PAN provided little competition for PRI for many years, it began winning some gubernatorial elections in the north in the 1990s. It was created to represent business interests opposed to centralization and anti-clericalism, PRI's practice of keeping the church out of politics. PAN is strongest in the north, where the tradition of resisting direction from Mexico City is the strongest. Under Felipe Calderón's presidency, the party also gained support in the south, partly because Calderón and Vicente Fox before him expanded poverty assistance programs that helped indigenous people in the southern states. PAN's platform includes regional autonomy, less government intervention in the economy, clean and fair elections, good rapport with the Catholic Church, and support for private and religious education. PAN is usually considered to be PRI's opposition to the right. PAN's candidates won the presidency in 2000 and 2006, and between the 2006 and 2009 midterm elections, it had more deputies and senators in the legislature than any other party. Although Felipe Calderón remained popular as president, the party experienced a major setback when it lost more than 60 seats in the lower house of the legislature in 2009, and 28 more seats in 2012. PAN's hold in the Senate increased slightly in 2012, with a gain of 3 seats, 33 senators. The PAN candidate for president in 2012, Josefina Vasquez Mota, came in third, gaining majorities in only 4 states. PRD. The Democratic Revolutionary Party, or PRD, is generally thought of as PRI's opposition on the left. Its presidential candidate in 1998 and 1994 was Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, the son of Mexico's famous and revered president Lázaro Cárdenas. He was ejected from PRI for demanding reform that emphasized social justice and populism, and he responded by switching parties. In 1988, Cárdenas won 31.1% of the official vote, and PRD captured 139 seats in the Chamber of Deputies, out of 500. Many observers believe that if the election of 1988 had been honest, Cárdenas actually would have won. PRD has been plagued by a number of problems that have weakened it since 1988. It has had trouble defining a left-of-center alternative to the market-oriented policies established by PRI. Their leaders have also been divided on issues, and have sometimes publicly quarreled. The party has been criticized for poor organization, and Cárdenas is not generally believed to have the same degree of charisma as did his famous father. PRD's standard bearer has been Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the popular mayor of Mexico City, who barely lost at presidential elections in 2006 and 2012. However, Obrador's refusal to accept the results of the election in 2006 split PRD once again into factions, those that support Obrador and those who oppose him. The party made significant gains in the legislative elections of 2006, but the disarray after the election caused it to lose more than half of its seats in the lower house in 2009. In 2012, the party regained some of those seats, 100 deputies, up from 69 in 2009. However, in 2015, it lost those gains, only winning 56 seats. Obrador lost the presidency of the party in 2008 and announced his resignation from the party in 2012. He has supported smaller parties on the left, including National Regeneration Movement, Morena, and Citizens Movement. Elections. Citizens of Mexico directly elect their president, Chamber of Deputy Representatives, and senators, as well as a host of state and local officials. Although the parties have overlapping constituencies, typical voter profiles are PRI, small town or rural, less educated, older, poorer. PAN, from the north, middle-class professionals or business, urban, better educated, at least high school, some college, religious, or those less strict about separation of church and state. Lost support in the 2012 presidential election to PRI. PRD, younger, politically active, from the central states, some education, small town or urban, drew some middle-class and older voters in 2006, gained support in 2012 in southern states, strongest in Mexico City area. Elections in Mexico today tend to be most competitive in urban areas, but more competition in rural areas could be seen in the presidential election and legislative elections of 2006 and 2012. Under PRI control, elections were typically fraudulent, with the patron-client system encouraging bribery and favor swapping. Since 1988, Mexico has been under pressure to have fairer elections. Part of the demands have come from a more urban, educated population, and some have come from international sources as Mexico has become more and more a part of world business, communication, and trade. The elections of 2000 brought the PAN candidate, Vicente Fox, into the presidency. PAN captured 208 of the 500 deputies in the lower house, Chamber of Deputies, but PRI edged them out with 209 members. 46 of the 128 senators elected were from PAN, as opposed to 60 for PRI. The newly created competitive electoral system has encouraged coalitions to form on the left and right of PRI, and the split in votes may be encouraging gridlock, a phenomena unknown to Mexico under the old PRI-controlled governments. The elections of 2006. When the votes were counted in the presidential election on July 2, 2006, PAN candidate Felipe Calderón and PRD candidate Andrés Manuel López Obrador were virtually tied for the lead, with PRI candidate Roberto Madrazo trailing far behind. The official vote tally put Calderón ahead by 230,000 votes out of 41.5 million votes cast, about a half percentage point difference. Obrador challenged the results as fraudulent and demanded a recount. The election tribunal investigated his allegations, and for more than 2 months the election was held in the balance, until the tribunal gave its report. In early August, the tribunal ordered recounts on only about 9% of the precincts, not the full recount demanded by Obrador. In early September, the tribunal announced that the recount did not change the outcome, despite some errors in math and some cases of fraud. During the entire process, Obrador held rallies for supporters, and he refused to accept the tribunal's decision, claiming the election was stolen by a broad conspiracy between business leaders and the government. He encouraged his supporters to protest, and he claimed to be the legitimate president. Obrador's challenge drew strength from well-established traditions from the political culture, populism and dissent among the elites. But by 2007, the crisis had passed. The legislative elections of 2006 changed the power balance as PRI lost heavily in both houses. PAN received modest gains in the Chamber of Deputies, and PRD gained many seats in both houses. The election of 2012. PRI's prospects for the 2012 presidential election were enhanced by the popularity of Enrique Peña Nieto, who stepped down from the governorship of Mexico State in 2011. PRI capitalized on a growing sense among voters that neither PAN nor PRD is any less corrupt than PRI, and many think that PRI is more able to deliver on political promises. About 30% of Mexican voters were younger than 18 when PRI lost power in 2000, so they do not remember some of the party's worst excesses when it dominated government and politics in Mexico. In 2012, the presidency was recaptured by PRI, with Peña Nieto winning more than 38% of the vote. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the PRD candidate, came in second with less than 32% of the vote, and Josefina Vázquez Mota, the PAN candidate, was third with just over 25% of the vote. In the Senate, PRA gained 2 seats from the 2006, but still held only 52 of the 128 seats. In the Chamber of Deputies, PRI lost 32 seats from 2009, as did PAN, with PRD and several minor parties making some significant gains. PRI also gained some gubernatorial seats, but the balance of power at the state level remained similar to the configuration before the election. The election of 2012 affirmed the fact that Mexico has developed a competitive, multi-party electoral system, with PRI still playing an important but not dominant role in Mexican politics. Midterm Elections 2015. In the midterm elections of 2015, PRI took the largest portion of seats in the Chamber of Deputies, but still held only a plurality, not a majority. PRI won 203 seats, PAN won 108 seats, and PRD won only 56 seats. Notably, minor parties collectively gained 133 seats, drawing support from voters who had previously supported PRD. Obrador's National Regeneration Movement, Morena, drew almost 8% of the vote, and the ecologist Green Party and Citizens Movement also drew a significant number of votes. The midterm election was also notable in that it allowed independent candidates to run for office for the first time. Independent Jamie El Bronco Rodriguez won the governorship of the wealthy northern state Nuevo León. Other independents ran strong campaigns elsewhere in Mexico. Electoral system. The president is elected to the first-past-the-post plurality system with no runoff election required. As a result, the current Mexican president, Enrique Peña Nieto, was elected with only a little more than a third of the total popular votes. Members of Congress are elected through a dual system of first-past-the-post and proportional representation. Proportional representation was increased in a major reform law in 1986, a change that gave power to political parties that have challenged PRI's control. Each of Mexico's 31 states elects 3 senators. 2 of them are determined by plurality vote, and the third is determined by whichever party receives the second highest number of votes. Also, 32 Senate seats are determined nationally through a system of proportional representation that divides the seats according to the number of votes cast for each party. In the lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, 300 seats are determined by plurality within single-member districts, and 200 seats are chosen by proportional representation. Interest groups and popular movements. The Mexican government's corporate structure generally responds pragmatically to the demands of interest groups through accommodation and co-optation. As a result, political tensions among major interests have rarely escalated into the kinds of serious conflict that can threaten stability. Where open conflict has occurred, it has generally been met with efforts to find a solution. Because private organizations have been linked for so long to the government, Mexico's development of a separate civil society has been slow. In the past 30 years or so, business interests have networked with political leaders to protect the growth of commerce, finance, industry, and agriculture. Under state corporatism, these business elites have become quite wealthy, but they were never incorporated into PRI. However, political leaders have listened to and responded to their demands. Labor has been similarly accommodated within the system. Wage levels for unionized workers grew fairly consistently between 1940 and 1982, when the economic crisis prompted by lower oil prices caused wages to drop. The power of union bosses is declining, partly because unions are weaker than in the past, and partly because union members are more independent. Today, with Pan recently controlling the presidency, business interests may exhibit more characteristics of neo-corporatism, but there is no clear evidence that businesses are controlling the government. One powerful interest group is Educational Workers Union, Latin America's largest trade union. It has long had the power to negotiate salaries for teachers each year, and many see it as a neo-corporatist group that has a great deal of power over government decisions in education. In early 2013, Peña Nieto's government sent a message to the union when it arrested a powerful leader, Elba Esther Gordillo. Federal prosecutors charged her with the embezzlement of 2 billion pesos of union funds that she allegedly spent on designer clothes, art, property, and cosmetic surgery. The arrest came the day after Peña Nieto had signed into law an education reform designed to pry control of schools from the union. The government promised that teachers' jobs would no longer be for sale or inherited, and teachers who failed assessments would be fired. In rural areas, peasant organizations have been encouraged by PRI, particularly through the ejido system that grants land from the Mexican government to the organizations themselves. Since the 1980s, these groups have often demanded greater independence from the government and have supported movements for better prices for crops and access to markets and credit. They have joined with other groups to promote better education, health services, and environmental protection. Urban popular movements also abound in Mexico, with organizations concerned about social welfare spending, city services, neighborhood improvements, economic development, feminism, and professional identity. As these groups have strengthened and become more independent, the political system has had to negotiate and bargain with them, transforming the political culture and increasing the depth of civil society. The media. As long as PRI monopolized government and politics in Mexico, the media had little power to criticize the government or to influence public opinion. The government rewarded newspapers, magazines, radio, and television stations that supported them with special favors, such as access to newsprint or airwaves. The government also subsidized the salaries of reporters, writers, and media personalities who strongly supported PRI initiatives. A considerable amount of revenue came from government-placed advertisements, so few media outlets could afford to openly criticize the government. The media began to become more independent starting in the 1980s, at the same time that PRI began losing its hold in other areas. Today there are several major television networks in the country, and many people have access to international newspapers and networks such as CNN and BBC. Several news magazines now offer opinions of government initiatives, just as similar magazines do in the United States. One indication of freedom of the press came early in the Fox administration, when the media publicized Toallagate, a scandal involving the purchase of some significantly overpriced towels for the president's mansion. The Mexican press also criticized President Fox for his comes y te vas, eat and leave instructions to Fidel Castro after United Nations gathering, so as not to offend U.S. President George W. Bush with Castro's presence. So, for better or worse, Mexican citizens now have access to a much broader range of political opinions than they've ever had before. During the presidential campaign in 2012, protests took place in Mexico City against alleged bias toward PRI and Peña Nieto in the print and television media, particularly Televisa, the largest multimedia company in North America. The movement, Yo soy 132, I am 132, formed accusing Peña Nieto as the candidate of corruption, tyranny, and authoritarianism. Mass protests organized by university students then took place across the country, and the movement successfully demanded that, unlike the first presidential debate, the second debate be broadcast on national television. Despite the changes, the media's independence from the government came into question in early 2015, when MVS Radio fired a popular host, Carmen Arstegui, after she launched a series of critical attacks on the government. One controversial exposure was that President Peña Nieto's wife had bought a mansion with money loaned by one of the government's preferred contractors. Aristegui's firing raised suspicion that the government put pressure on MVS's radio to get rid of her.